I stood on my back porch, clutching a mug of lukewarm black coffee, watching the tragedy of physics unfold in slow motion. It was a beautiful Sunday morning in Pennsylvania. The birds were singing, the sun was cutting through the heavy humidity left behind by last night's storm. And down below, in the yard that belonged to my neighbor, Mrs. Vanderkamp, a police officer was trying to keep his boots from sinking into what used to be a manicured lawn. He wasn't succeeding. From my vantage point, high on the hill, the devastation was absolute. It looked like a giant had taken a massive scoop of chocolate pudding and hurled it directly at the Vanderkamp estate. Her white vinyl fence was gone, just completely erased, buried somewhere under 4 feet of wet, heavy Pennsylvania clay. Her prized rose bushes? History. And the centerpiece of her existence, the brand-new, kidney-shaped, heated saltwater swimming pool that she had mentioned to me approximately 400 times in the last 6 months? Well, it was still kidney-shaped. But it was no longer a pool. It was a swamp. A thick, oozing brown lagoon that was currently settling with a gross sucking sound that I could hear from 50 feet away. Mrs. Vanderkamp was down there, screaming. She was vibrating with such intensity that I was surprised she wasn't sinking faster than the cop. She was pointing a manicured finger up at me, screaming something about criminal negligence and domestic terrorism. The cop looked up at me. I raised my coffee mug in a silent salute. I wasn't worried. I wasn't panicked. Honestly, I felt fantastic. Because I had the one thing that beats a hysterical neighbor and a confused cop every day of the week. I had a paper trail thick enough to choke a horse. To understand why my backyard is currently located in her backyard, we have to rewind 2 weeks. Back to a simpler time. Back to when I still had a retaining wall. It started, as most headaches do, on a Tuesday. I was outside, minding my own business, trying to grill a steak. My house sits on a steep grade. I'm the king of the hill, literally. My property is the highest one on the street, and the backyard drops off sharply into the properties below. When I bought the place a decade ago, the previous owner, a pragmatic old guy named Frank, had installed a massive retaining wall made of railroad ties. It wasn't pretty, I'll admit that. It was dark, creosote-soaked wood, stacked 6 feet high and running the entire length of the property line. It looked like something from a frontier fort, but it was solid. It held back about 400 tons of earth, rock, and clay. It did its job without complaint. I was flipping my ribeye when I heard the distinct sound of a throat clearing. It wasn't a polite throat clear. It was a pay attention to me immediately hem that grated on the soul. I looked down over the edge of the wall. There she was, Mrs. Vanderkamp. She had moved in 6 months ago, flushed with alimony money and a burning desire to make everyone else's life as rigid as her hairspray helmet. She was standing on her new patio, wearing a white caftan that probably cost more than my truck. "Hello, Jack," she called out. She never just said hello, she announced it. "Evening, Mrs. Vanderkamp," I said, turning the steak. "Nice night." "Is it?" She gestured vaguely at the sky, then pointed a bony finger at my wall. "I'm trying to enjoy a glass of Pinot on my Tuscan veranda. But do you know what I'm staring at?" "The sunset?" I guessed. "No, I am staring at that monstrosity," she spat. "That wall, it is hideous. It looks like a pile of rotting lumber. It completely clashes with the Mediterranean aesthetic I've cultivated down here." I looked at the wall. Then I looked at her Mediterranean aesthetic, which consisted mostly of plastic statues of Greek gods she bought at a garden center and a lot of beige pavement. "It's a railroad tie wall, Mrs. Vanderkamp," I said reasonably. "It's been there for 30 years. It holds up the hill." "It's a blight," she declared. "I'm having a pool party next month for the Home and Garden Club. I cannot have my guests looking up at that garbage. I want you to remove it." I laughed. I couldn't help it. "Remove it? Mrs. Vanderkamp, if I remove that wall, my yard falls into your yard. That's how gravity works." "Don't be dramatic," she scoffed, waving her hand as if dismissing the laws of physics. "I've spoken to a designer. He says a nice, tiered limestone terracing would be much more appropriate, perhaps with some creeping ivy." "Limestone terracing?" I did a quick mental calculation. "That sounds nice. It also sounds like $50,000. Are you offering to pay for it?" Her face went sour. "Why should I pay for improvements to your property? It is your responsibility to maintain your land. That wall is an eyesore, and frankly, I think it's dangerous. It looks rotten." "It's not rotten. It's treated wood. It's fine." "I want it gone, Jack. Replace it with stone or brick, something that matches my patio." "No," I said, turning back to my steak. "I'm not spending 50 grand because you don't like the color of my wood. Have a nice night." I thought that was the end of it. I was naive. 3 days later, I was coming home from work. I'm a shift manager at a logistics plant, so I deal with unreasonable people all day, but at least I get paid for it, when I saw the envelope taped to my front door. It wasn't a friendly note. It was bright orange. City Code Enforcement. I ripped it open. Notice of violation. 12. Hilltop Drive, violation, unpermitted, unsafe structure, retaining wall. Description, wooden retaining structure deemed unsightly and potentially structurally compromised. Structure does not meet current code 44. B. Aesthetics and materials for hillside retention. Order, abate immediately. Unsafe? I muttered to the empty driveway. "It's built like a tank." I looked down the hill. Mrs. Vanderkamp was in her yard, directing a pool boy. She glanced up, saw me holding the orange paper, and smirked. A full-on, Grinch-stealing Christmas smirk. I called the number on the paper immediately. I got a voicemail. I left a message that was polite but firm. The next morning, I took a half-day off work to meet the inspector. I expected a structural engineer. I expected someone with a hard hat and a measuring tape. Instead, I got Gary. Gary pulled up in a city-issued Prius. He was a small man with a clip-on tie and a clipboard that he held like a shield. He didn't look at the wall. He looked at his paperwork. Mrs. Vanderkamp, sensing blood in the water, materialized at the property line almost instantly. "Good morning, Inspector," she chirped. She had never sounded that happy to see me. "Finally getting this hazard sorted out?" Gary nodded at her, then looked at me with the weary eyes of a man who just wanted to go to lunch. "Sir, we've received a complaint. I've reviewed the file. We have no record of a permit for this wall." "It was built in 1985, I explained, trying to keep my voice level. "Permits weren't digitized then. The previous owner built it. It's grandfathered in, isn't it?" "Not if it's deemed a nuisance or unsafe," Gary droned. He walked up to the wall and kicked one of the ties with his loafer. The wall didn't budge. His foot barely made a sound against the dense wood. "See that? Splintering, discoloration. It's end of life." "It's railroad ties, Gary," I said. "They're supposed to look like that. They're soaked in creosote. They will outlive us both." "It's ugly," Mrs. Vanderkamp chimed in. "It lowers my property value." Gary turned to me. Code 44B allows the city to demand removal of structures that negatively impact the visual cohesion of the neighborhood. Plus, without a permit on file, it's an illegal build. You have to take it down. I felt a vein in my forehead start to throb. Okay, Gary. Let's say I take it down. What happens to the dirt behind it? Gary shrugged. You'll need to stabilize the slope. Exactly, I said. I'll need to build a new wall, immediately. You'll need a permit for that, Gary said, pulling a form from his clipboard. Fine, I snapped. I'll apply for a permit to build a new block wall, standard cinder block. I can do that myself for maybe $5,000. Mrs. Vanderkamp made a gagging noise. Cinder block? Absolutely not. That's worse than the wood. Inspector, doesn't the code say new construction has to fit the neighborhood character? Gary looked at Mrs. Vanderkamp, then at her fancy patio, then back at me. She's right. If you build a new wall, it has to be approved by the adjacent property owners if it borders their land, or it has to be faced with approved masonry, limestone, brick, or decorative paver. I can't afford a $50,000 limestone wall, I said through gritted teeth. That's not the city's problem, Gary said. He scribbled on his clipboard and ripped off a carbon copy. Here is your order to abate. You have 14 days to remove the unpermitted structure. If it's not gone by the 24th, we start fining you $500 a day. I stared at the paper. Let me get this straight. You are ordering me to remove the wall that holds up my yard. Yes. And I can't build a cheap replacement because she won't like it. You need to follow code, Gary said, getting back into his Prius. And what happens if it rains after I take the wall down? I asked. Gary didn't even look back. That's a civil matter, sir. Just get it done. I stood there for a long time after Gary left. Mrs. Vanderkamp was beaming. You should really hire a professional, Jack, she called up. I know a mason who does lovely work with imported Italian slate. I'm not hiring a mason, Mrs. Vanderkamp, I said quietly. Well, you have to do something, she said, turning to walk back to her house. Tick-tock. She was right. I had to do something, but I wasn't going to hire a mason. I went inside, sat down at my computer, and looked up the number for Big Tony. Big Tony wasn't a mason. Big Tony ran an excavation company called Earth Movers. His slogan was, "We dig it, you fill it." I had met him a few years ago when I needed a stump pulled. He was a man shaped like a beer keg with arms like hydraulic pistons, and he knew more about dirt than any scientist on the planet. He showed up the next day in a dump truck that sounded like it was dying of emphysema. He walked into the backyard, took one look at the wall, then looked down at Mrs. Vanderkamp's pool. He let out a low whistle. She pissed you off, huh? She called the city, I said. They ordered me to remove the wall. Tony laughed. It sounded like gravel in a blender. Remove it? Boss, that wall is the only thing keeping your yard from becoming her patio furniture. I know, I said. I tried to tell them. The inspector didn't care. He gave me an order to abate. I handed Tony the orange slip. Tony put on a pair of reading glasses that looked comically small on his face. He read it, his eyebrows climbing higher and higher. Remove unpermitted structure. Unsafe. Blight. Wow, this guy Gary is a moron. He is, I agreed. Here's the situation, Tony. I have to take it down. I tried to apply for a permit to put up a basic block wall, but the city rejected it this morning because Mrs. Vanderkamp filed a preemptive objection regarding aesthetic continuity. She wants limestone. Limestone? Tony spat on the ground. Limestone requires a 3-foot footer and drainage. That's a massive job. I'm not doing it, I said. I'm just going to remove the wall, like the order says. Tony looked at me. He took off his glasses. His eyes narrowed. He looked at the steep angle of the slope. He kicked the dirt. It was clay, heavy, dense, non-absorbent Pennsylvania clay. "Jack," Tony said slowly, "if we take these ties out, and we don't put nothing back, and it rains—" "I know," I said. "I mean, it's gonna be bad. That dirt has been compressed against that wood for 30 years. Once we release that pressure, it's gonna want to move." "I know," I repeated. "But I have a court order. Look at the date." Tony looked at the date. "You got 10 days left." "I want you to come out on Friday," I said. "That's the 23rd, the day before the fines start. I want you to pull every single railroad tie. I want you to stack them neatly in the front driveway to be hauled off. And then I want you to leave." "You don't want me to grade it, slope it back?" "Does the order say grade and slope?" I asked. Tony checked the paper. "Nope, says remove unpermitted structure." "Then we remove the structure. If I grade it, that's construction. I don't have a permit for construction. I only have an order for demolition." A slow grin spread across Tony's face. It was a terrifying look. "You're a sick man, Jack." "I just want to be a law-abiding citizen," I said. "But Tony, I need to cover my bases. I need you to write up a bid. Explicitly state that removing the wall without replacement will result in catastrophic slope failure. Put it in bold. Make it red." "I'll put it in all caps," Tony promised. "And I need you to go with me to the city office tomorrow. We're going to record a conversation with Gary." "I love field trips," Tony said. The meeting with Gary was the final nail in the coffin. Not my coffin. Hers. We walked into the code enforcement office. It smelled like toner and despair. Gary was sitting behind a plexiglass barrier. When he saw me, he sighed. When he saw Tony, who was wearing a neon yellow shirt that said "Dirt Nap" on the back, he looked nervous. "Inspector," I said, placing my phone on the counter, screen up, recording app running. "This is Tony. He's my contractor. We are here to discuss the abatement order for 412 Hilltop." "Did you take it down yet?" Gary asked, not looking up from his computer. "We're scheduled for Friday," Tony rumbled. "But listen, Gary, can I call you Gary? I've been moving dirt for 40 years. You've got a 45-degree slope there holding back Class C clay soil. That wall is structural." "The city has determined it is an unpermitted nuisance," Gary recited robotically. "Yeah, I got that," Tony said. "But here's the thing. If I pull that wall, the hill is gonna slide. It ain't a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Especially if we get weather. You're asking us to create a landslide hazard." "We are asking you to bring the property up to code," Gary snapped. "If the hill is unstable, the homeowner needs to stabilize it." "I'm trying," I interjected. "I have the permit application right here for the block wall." I slid the paper under the glass. Gary pushed it back. "Denied. Aesthetic objection. Told you. Talk to your neighbor. Get her approval for a design." "She won't approve anything I can afford," I said. "So? I'm in a bind. You're telling me to tear down the old wall by Friday, but you won't let me build a new one." "That is your problem, sir," Gary said, his patience snapping. "You have until Friday to remove the blight. If you don't, I will issue a citation for non-compliance. $500 a day. Is there anything else?" "So to be clear," I said, speaking clearly for the microphone, "you are ordering me to remove the retaining wall immediately, despite the contractor's warning that this will cause a mudslide, and you are refusing my permit to replace it immediately." "I am ordering you to follow the law," Gary shouted. "Remove the wall, next." We walked out. Tony was shaking his head. "That guy is going to wish he stayed in bed." "Friday," I said. "Bring the big excavator." The week passed with agonizing slowness. Every day I saw Mrs. Vanderkamp in her yard, adding touches to her oasis. She had new cushions delivered. She had a floating lounge chair in the pool. She was prepping for her party. She saw me on Thursday evening. I was taking down the fence sections attached to the wall to prep for Tony. "Is it happening?" she called out, a glass of wine in hand. "Are you finally cleaning up that mess?" "Crew comes tomorrow," I said. "Mrs. Vanderkamp, I'm going to ask you one last time. Please sign off on the block wall. If I take this wood out, there is nothing holding the dirt." She laughed. A high, tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. "Oh, Jack, stop trying to scare me. Dirt is dirt. It stays where you put it. Just get that ugly wood out of my sight. And don't make a mess." "I won't make the mess," I muttered under my breath. "You will." Friday arrived. The sky was a slate gray. The weather app on my phone had a little icon I hadn't seen in a while. A double rain cloud with a lightning bolt. A nor'easter was pushing up the coast. Expected rainfall, 3 or 4 inches. Perfect. Tony arrived at 7:00 a.m. with a massive excavator on a flatbed. The sound of the diesel engine waking up was the song of my people. He tracked the machine into the backyard, the steel treads chewing up my lawn. I didn't care. My lawn was about to be the least of my problems. Mrs. Vanderkamp was watching from her sunroom window. I saw her sipping coffee, looking pleased. She probably thought she had won. She thought she had bullied me into submission. "Ready, boss?" Tony asked, climbing into the cab. "Let her rip," I said. The demolition was violent and fast. Tony didn't play around. He hooked the bucket of the excavator onto the top row of railroad ties and pulled. Crack! The sound of 30-year-old spikes screaming as they were ripped from the wood echoed through the neighborhood. The first tie came free, dangling like a loose tooth. Tony swung the boom and dropped it onto the growing pile in the driveway. As the wall came down, row by row, the reality of the situation became apparent. The dirt behind the wall was dark, wet, and packed tight. It stood vertically for a moment, holding its shape like a sandcastle, but you could see the moisture glistening in it. It was heavy. By noon, the wall was gone. The backyard looked naked. A 6-foot-high vertical face of exposed earth loomed over Mrs. Vanderkamp's fence. It looked angry. "That ain't gonna hold," Tony said, climbing down for lunch. He pointed to a small trickle of dirt that crumbled off the face and fell against Mrs. Vanderkamp's white vinyl fence. "We followed the order," I said. We spent the afternoon cleaning up the wood. By 4 p.m., the driveway was full of rotten ties, and the backyard was empty. According to the city code, when you have an excavation drop-off, you need to install safety netting. So, purely for malicious compliance, I bought the cheapest, flimsiest orange safety fencing Home Depot sold. We stapled it to a few wooden stakes along the edge of the drop. It looked like a mockery of safety. It would stop a toddler, maybe. It would not stop a mountain. At 5:00 p.m., Tony loaded up the excavator. He handed me the invoice. It was stamped in bright red ink. "Work performed under protest. Customer and contractor acknowledge extreme risk of slope failure due to city order." "Good luck, Jack," Tony said, shaking my hand. He looked at the sky. It was getting darker. The wind was picking up. "You better buy some popcorn." "Way ahead of you," I said. I went inside, showered, and ordered a pizza. I sat by the window. At 7:00 p.m., the first drops hit the glass. It started slow. A gentle tapping. Then it picked up. Within an hour, it was a steady drumbeat. By 10 o'clock p.m., it was a deluge. The nor'easter had stalled right over us. It was raining sheets of water. I turned off the lights in the house so I could see outside. The streetlights cast an eerie orange glow over the backyard. I saw the first major failure at 11:30 p.m. A chunk of earth the size of a microwave detached from the top of the slope. It didn't roll. It slumped. It hit the orange safety fence, which snapped instantly, and then it thudded against Mrs. Vanderkamp's white vinyl fence. The fence held for about 10 minutes, but the water was relentless. It was soaking into that exposed clay face, turning it from a solid into a liquid. The soil was liquefying. At midnight, the main event started. I heard a sound like a zipper tearing open, magnified 1,000 times. The entire face of the hill, about 40 feet wide and 6 feet deep, decided it was tired of being a hill. It wanted to be a valley. It moved in one heavy, gelatinous wave. Crunch. Mrs. Vanderkamp's vinyl fence exploded. It didn't just fall over, it was pulverized. White shards of plastic flew into the air. And then the mud came. It was a brown tsunami. It rolled over her patio furniture, burying her teak table and matching chairs instantly. It flowed around her pillars. And then, with a sound I will cherish to my dying day, a wet, slurping shulroop, it found the pool. The water in the pool was crystal blue, illuminated by her underwater LED lights. The mud hit it like a cannonball. The water was displaced, surging up and out, washing over the deck, while the thick sludge filled the deep end, then the shallow end. The lights in the pool flickered and died as the mud crushed the fixtures. Then the lights in her house snapped on. I saw the back door fly open. Mrs. Vanderkamp ran out, wearing a silk robe. She stopped. She screamed. It was a scream of pure, unadulterated horror. She put her hands to her head. The mud was still moving. It was flowing like lava now, a steady river of sludge pouring from my yard into hers. It was filling the pool, overflowing it, and starting to pile up against her sliding glass back doors. She looked up at my house. I was standing in the window, dark, invisible to her. But she knew. She ran back inside. 5 minutes later, I saw the flashing lights of a police cruiser reflecting off my ceiling. I went to bed. I slept like a baby. Which brings us back to Sunday morning. The coffee. The cop. The screaming. I finished my coffee and walked down the stairs of my deck to meet them. I wore my bathrobe and slippers. I wanted to look casual. "Officer," I said as I approached the property line, which was now blurry, given that half my property was currently sitting on her property. "You!" Mrs. Vanderkamp shrieked. She looked deranged. She had mud on her ankles. "Arrest him! He destroyed my house! He attacked me!" The officer, a young guy named Deputy Miller, looked exhausted. "Sir, are you the owner of 412? "I am," I said. "Your neighbor alleges that you—" "Well," he gestured at the mud swamp, "that you caused this." "I didn't cause anything, officer," I said calmly. "I simply complied with a city order." "He dug it up!" Mrs. Vanderkamp yelled. "He brought a machine and tore down the wall. I saw him." "Is that true?" Miller asked. "Did you remove a retaining wall?" "I did," I said. "On Friday." "Why would you do that with a storm coming?" Miller asked, looking at the slope. Because I was ordered to by the city code enforcement, I said. I reached into my robe pocket and pulled out a Ziploc bag. Inside was the paperwork. I always keep my receipts. I handed the bag to Miller. That is the order to abate. It states I had to remove the unpermitted structure by the 24th or face fines. Friday was the 23rd. Miller read it. He frowned. And here, I pointed to the second document in the bag, is the denial of my permit to build a replacement wall. It was blocked by Mrs. Vanderkamp here, citing aesthetic objections. Mrs. Vanderkamp stopped screaming. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. And here, I said, pointing to a USB drive I had also put in the bag, is a recording of me and my contractor in the Code Enforcement Office 3 days ago, specifically telling the inspector that if we removed the wall without replacing it, this exact thing would happen. The inspector told me to do it anyway. Deputy Miller looked at the paperwork. He looked at the mud. He looked at Mrs. Vanderkamp, whose face was rapidly losing its color. He handed the bag back to me. He let out a short, sharp laugh. Well, Miller said, hitching up his belt. Ma'am, I'm no lawyer, but it looks like he did exactly what he was told to do. But my pool, she whispered. Civil matter, Miller said. Sir, have a nice day. Ma'am, I'd suggest you call your insurance. Miller turned and walked back to his cruiser, stepping carefully over the mud. I turned to Mrs. Vanderkamp. She was staring at the brown sludge that filled her pool. A single white plastic chair floated upside down in the middle of it, like a shipwreck survivor. You know, I said, I think you were right. The wood really was an eyesore. This looks much more natural. She made a sound like a tea kettle boiling over and stormed into her house, slamming the door so hard I felt it in my feet. I went back inside and made more coffee. The battle was won, but the war was just starting. Now came the part I really enjoyed. The insurance phase. I called my insurance company first thing Monday morning. I explained the situation simply. The city ordered me to remove a structure. I removed it. The neighbor blocked the replacement. The storm washed the dirt away. The adjuster, a guy named Steve, came out on Tuesday. He took photos. He looked at the paperwork. He laughed for 5 minutes straight. We're denying liability, Steve said, wiping tears from his eyes. This is a slam dunk. You were under legal duress from the city to remove the wall. You attempted to mitigate the damage by applying for a replacement permit. The neighbor blocked it. The negligence is on the neighbor and the city. We aren't paying a dime. Mrs. Vanderkamp's insurance company, however, was not laughing. They sent a team. They looked at the pool. Total loss. They looked at the patio. Total loss. They looked at the foundation of her house, compromised by water intrusion. Then they came to talk to me. I gave them the same Ziploc bag. I watched the color drain from the face of Mrs. Vanderkamp's adjuster. He realized in that moment that his company was about to pay out a massive claim, and they had no one to sue, except the city. And Mrs. Vanderkamp. See, insurance policies have clauses about contributory negligence. By blocking my permit to fix the wall that she demanded be removed, Mrs. Vanderkamp had technically contributed to her own disaster. 2 weeks later, the letters started arriving. First, a letter from the city. They were rescinding the order to abate and issuing an emergency order to stabilize. I called Gary. "Hello, Gary," I said when he picked up. "Mr. Reynolds," Gary sounded tired. His voice lacked that bureaucratic arrogance he had before. "We need to discuss the slope." "I agree," I said. "It's very unstable. I'd love to fix it, but I need a permit." You have the permit, Gary said quickly. We approved it this morning, emergency approval. You can build whatever you want. Block, poured concrete, whatever. Just stop the mud. That's great, Gary, I said. But there's a problem. I spent my wall money on the demolition you ordered. I'm tapped out. You have to stabilize the land, Gary shouted. I can't. I'm broke. But I hear Mrs. Vanderkamp is very concerned about her property value. Maybe the city should talk to her. I hung up. The next day, a lawyer representing Mrs. Vanderkamp's insurance company called. They wanted to settle. They wanted to stop the bleeding. They knew if the hill slid further, her house was next. The deal was beautiful. In exchange for me allowing them access to my property to perform emergency stabilization, they would cover the cost of the new retaining wall, and not just a block wall. Oh no. Because the insurance company wanted to ensure this never happened again, they hired a top-tier engineering firm. They designed a reinforced, poured concrete wall faced with, you guessed it, limestone. It took 3 months to build. It was loud. It was dusty. Mrs. Vanderkamp had to live with jackhammers and cement mixers starting at 7 o'clock a.m. every day. She couldn't use her backyard because it was a construction zone. Her pool was still a mud pit because they couldn't drain it until the hill was fixed. I watched the construction from my window, drinking coffee. When it was finally done, it was a masterpiece. A $50,000 wall paid for entirely by Mrs. Vanderkamp's insurance premiums, which I assume skyrocketed. It was beautiful. It was sturdy. It bumped my property value up significantly. On the final day of inspection, Gary came back out to sign off on the permit. He looked at the new wall. He looked at me. Are we done here? Gary asked. I think so, Gary, I said. Looks up to code to me. Mrs. Vanderkamp put her house on the market a week later. The listing photos were clever. They didn't show the backyard, just the potential for a pool. I was outside watering my grass when she was loading the last box into her car. She looked 10 years older. She saw me and froze. Nice wall, I said. She didn't say a word. She just got in her car and drove away. I turned the hose on the new limestone. It turned a rich, warm color when it was wet. It really did match the neighborhood aesthetic perfectly. I walked to the edge and looked down. The new owners were already moving in. A young couple. They looked nice. They were standing by the empty concrete shell of the pool, scratching their heads, probably wondering why there was still a faint stain of brown mud around the rim. I waved. Hi there, welcome to the neighborhood. The husband looked up and waved back. Hey, nice wall you got there. Thanks, Archibas, yelled back. My neighbor gave it to me. I turned off the hose, went inside, and finally, after months of chaos, grilled my steak in peace.